Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And we're going to be talking about a very hot topic right now, unfortunately, because of recent events, as tends to happen when there's a horrible massacre. People start to debate gun ownership, gun rights, the Second Amendment, and so on. So let's talk about it. Let's try to approach it from kind of a philosophical perspective. Please leave a like, make sure you're subscribed, and hit that join button if you want to access special features, content, and support the channel. I am here with a guy who I don't know if he has any guns, but he looks like he's got a couple of guns growing out of his shoulders. Are he and I going to box? Well, I don't think we're in the same weight class, so unfortunately, I can't answer that. Please welcome Mark Pellegrino.
What's up, Rucka? Yes, I do own guns.
Oh, and you're a Californian.
Indeed.
All right. Well, watch out, everybody. So don't mess with this guy. Okay, so people treat gun rights like a fundamental right. Now, I think coming from the objectivist perspective, if there is a right to guns, it's a derivative right. Same way, like the right to own a publishing company or to publish a book, it's derivative. You have the right to free speech. That's like the fundamental right. And then like a printing press is derivative of that. So you have a right to not have force exerted on you. Like you have a right to your body and property. And then if someone threatens that, you have a right to defend yourself. And perhaps guns are like a tool that is derivative. Like the right to that tool is derivative from your more fundamental right. But people treat gun rights like the fundamental. They see like that is your life, your right to own any gun you want, or just that your right to guns is the fundamental. Do you see what I'm getting at? And do you agree with me that the right to guns is derivative?
Yes, I think the right to guns is derivative of the right to life, of course, and the right to self-defense. And I think some of the people clouding the picture out there, the libertarians and the anarchists, think there is actually no limit to the acquisition of a weapon for quote unquote self-defense. So in their minds, you could, if you could afford it, own a nuclear weapon. It's just market forces that prevent you from doing it, but to their minds, a howitzer is perfectly within an individual's capability to own grenades, rocket launchers, real weapons of warfare, which I think the state has a place in regulating, right? We delegate force to the state to mitigate it in our daily lives. And that would mean some form of regulation over certain types of weapons. But I have an issue with some of the bans that are being discussed right now for reasons that we can talk about in a few minutes.
Okay, so I definitely hear like anarchists and sort of libertarian types, which are basically in my perspective, today's new conservatives. Basically, a lot of them come from that background. And they say, yeah, you should be able to own a nuclear weapon. It's nobody's place to tell you if you may or may not. And yeah, I guess so. It would be market forces. Like nobody will produce one and sell it to you. Or if you do own one, then someone else will get one too. And you probably don't want that because then it'll be a very scary neighborhood. So maybe that's why we don't have to worry about too many people having nukes. But yeah, generally a lot of people that are more for that are kind of more on the, in their mind, liberty side of things. They see this, that there being no limit. So how do we figure out the proper limit in your view of like how many guns or what types of weapons? Is there a way that you approach this?
I mean, I think it's certainly a difficult question, but I think we have to consider what are the possible threats that an individual faces. And I think the threats that an individual faces are not so different from those of what a police officer would face. We face individual criminals, occasional groups of criminals, and at times when the civil authority breaks down, mobs of criminals who are looking to do bad things to us. So we should be armed appropriately to deal with those kinds of situations. So I don't think we should be armed any differently than a police officer is armed. Because when push comes to shove, we are the first line of defense. The police, according to the Supreme Court, do not have a legal they're not required by law to protect us. And 99.9% of the time, when you are confronted with a dangerous situation, you are on your own. There is nobody coming to rescue you. There may be somebody coming to put tape around your body or the other person's body, but they're not going to intervene for the most part. And we saw that in Uvalde, Texas. They certainly had an hour to intervene and did not. Armed citizens could have done a great deal of good in a situation like that. So as the first line of defense, facing the same things that a police officer faces, I think we should be armed with the same kinds of weapons.
Did you just say that according to the Supreme Court, police are not required to defend us?
Isn't that true? Yes, they're not legally bound to defend us.
So what are they supposed to do according to the Supreme Court?
Well, God knows. We live in a world of paradoxes.
Can you tell me what you mean? Did the Supreme Court basically? What did the Supreme Court say?
Perhaps it's a matter. I don't know exactly what the ruling was, but maybe it's a matter of liability, right? So that people aren't suing police departments for not being able to be there in the moment. Okay. So you're on your own, and if you're on your own, you should be armed as a policeman is armed to defend yourself against what the policeman, finds himself confronted with.
So I guess in my mind, there are two different sets of facts. There's the situation we live in today in a world where we live in a mixture of liberty and statism, where the police are a mixture of properly protecting people and oftentimes chasing after preventive criminals, that is, criminals guilty of selling drugs, of prostitution, of all types of black market activities that don't actually violate anybody's rights. And most likely the police won't be available to protect you. That's kind of the situation we live in today. But we can also talk about the ideal. Like, so what would a laissez-faire society look like? What would be your right? And perhaps in both cases, the answer is whatever weapons are necessary to protect yourself until the police do arrive. Because once the police are able and willing to protect you, then you should properly kind of delegate that to them, because that is the function of government.
Right. I mean, I think your responsibility as an individual is to end whatever threat you're confronted with by whatever means you can. And that may, in fact, mean killing somebody. But that's your responsibility for your life, your moral responsibility. Of course, if you can simply protect yourself until the legal authorities arrive, and then you can delegate the retaliatory force to them, fine, that's great. I've been in the situations like that before, where I've had to use a firearm against somebody, and I did not have to fire a shot. I was able to subdue the person until the police arrived and took them away. Had I not had a firearm, I'm convinced there would have been injury and death in the scenario. Wow. Likely mine, because he had a weapon. And so it's very possible that me and the person who was trying to subdue this person as well could have been very badly hurt or killed. So the gun diffused the violence to nothing, produced no casualties, and we were able to wait until the police came and took care of the guy.
That sounds like a very incredible story. And we're glad you're okay, obviously. So you said we should be able to have the same weapons as a police officer has, which is usually what, like a really good pistol, maybe a couple guns that they carry with them on their belt. But the recent events, such as these mass shootings, raised the debate about assault rifles or various like kind of heavy machine gun type stuff. I'm not an expert on guns, but go ahead.
There aren't assault rifles out there right now. There's weapons that more or less have the same capacity with some greater firepower, but they have none of the capacities of a military weapon. In other words, they can't fire continuously with one trigger pull. They fire like any other semi-automatic, like my handguns, with one bullet per trigger pull. So the most of what people are agitated by are the cosmetics of a gun, not the actual functioning of a gun. And they're conflating the two and wanting to ban something that looks like a military grade weapon, which is not in fact a military grade weapon. But you raise questions that I think are interesting, because a human being finds himself in various situations where he may have to defend himself against bad guys. finds himself in his home, where he may have to defend himself against intruders, outside, where he may have to defend himself against a robber, and in a situation where civil authority breaks down. And I think for each of those circumstances, different weapons are required, and different weapons have the capacity to end the threat much more easily with much less casualties. So people will say, for example, that the ultimate home defense weapon is a shotgun. Let's say a Remington 870 Magnum shotgun, where you cock the fore and it makes that famous sound that terrifies the shit out of pretty much any robber in your house. People will say that is the ultimate home defense weapon. And you also might say that in the street, a good a pistol that you can conceal and wear comfortably and know how to use is a very good defense weapon against someone in the street. And when it comes to civil disorder, where the civil authorities won't be there to protect you, and gangs of human beings may come to your place of business to burn it down, to loot it, to kill you, to have their way, and no police officers are going to stop them. Weapons like AR-15s and AK-47s are actually probably the best type of weapon you could bring to that fight. You have a high capacity magazine, and when somebody sees that, it's going to have a great deal of force just by virtue of the fact that you have it in your hand. Okay, let alone being able to use it, being able to deploy it. You have a much better, it equalizes the odds against the mob when you have a weapon like that. And that's what a weapon like a gun does. It equalizes odds. For women and the elderly, it makes them, as powerful, if not more so than the attacker or attackers that they're facing. And for the lone person against the mob, it makes them as powerful, if not more so, than the mob that is attacking them. It's very important that we understand that equalizing effect and how it can actually reduce violence, right? Just by the simple fact that you see it, its intimidation factor alone can reduce violence.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to kind of separate the status quo from the ideal, because in the status quo, we sadly live in a world where, the summer of 2020 showed that the government was not up to the task of, in my view, from keeping the streets safe and keeping businesses safe. Many businesses and maybe even some residencies were, vandalized. Certainly businesses were. And also, we live in a gang-ruled country in many areas. Drug dealers or other types of criminals, whether or not drugs should be illegal, they are, and people involved in them are often viciously brutal. And the things you need to do to join a gang, you need to show them how heartless you are and how unemotional you are. And oftentimes they make you kill someone you love, or they make you force somebody to hurt someone else, like all types of crazy things you need to do to join a gang. And often you need to join a gang just to survive in certain neighborhoods. So that's the world we're living in. And in this world, I can completely be sympathetic to that. There should be almost no limit to what type of weapon you can have to defend yourself. But what if we lived in a laissez-faire society? Then I guess we would basically kind of look at that set of facts and say, okay, what type of danger is probable, would we say? Like, what type of a danger is likely to occur, and then decide what types of weapons are appropriate to be legal in that context?
I think that would be a standard. I mean, let's face it, right now, the gun prohibitions that they level after every single one of these tragedies, they don't hurt the gang members that are terrorizing communities, but they certainly affect the low income people that live in the proximity of these gang members, who now cannot afford to purchase a weapon to defend themselves against these people who are obviously getting weapons outside of the law and for whom no laws would have effects. And I wish people understood that, but it's the unseen casualties of those wars that don't affect them. They're not on their emotional radar, and that's why they're able to pass these laws. This is something we should probably talk about with someone like an Ankar Gate, who's got much more philosophy under his belt as with respect to what kind of standard we use to judge what weapons are justifiable in defense of one's own life under various circumstances, and what weapons need to be barred and exclusively the property of the state. Certainly weapons of war, and I don't consider the quote unquote assault weapon, the semi-automatic rifle, a weapon of war, but it's certainly a weapon of self-defense. But certainly weapons of war need to be controlled by the state.
So that's a radical statement in the view of many people in the sort of liberty tent, I guess. To them, for you to put any limit on what weapon somebody could own are fighting words. And to them, to many of them, the primary reason that we have a right to own guns is to fend off the rise of dictatorship, or to overthrow the government if and when it becomes necessary. They would point to Thomas Jefferson, and they would point to various other, they would point to various historical reminders that there comes a time to overthrow the current government. But basically, so far, we've only really discussed the right to guns for emergency situations mostly with other civilians. So how do you think about the issue of owning weapons for the possible necessity of using them on the government someday?
Well, in this respect, I think I differ from Iran. He doesn't think civilians can fight the government, but I think the government is quite intimidated by an armed populace. That's why they do so much towards disarming populations before they become dictatorial. Hitler did it, Stalin did it. Every dictatorship pretty much does it. And I remember when I said something about this online to somebody recently, they said in a much harsher fashion, sort of what Iran says, yeah, a bunch of hillbillies are really going to deter governments. Well, yeah, actually, in the past, a bunch of armed hillbillies have in fact deterred governments. Armed Switzerland deterred Hitler from passing through there. He avoided it completely for a reason, because every single man of age had a weapon, and it creates quite an obstacle to a forward progression of a dictatorship. If the lessons of Viet Cong are anything, it's that an armed populace like Vietnam, like the armed populace like the Viet Cong, did quite a bit to throw off the American military machine, as did a bunch of armed third grade educated villagers in Afghanistan against the Soviet bear, and Ukrainians now being armed with weapons from the United States are doing a fairly decent job against a military machine. And America itself, remember that the folks that met the greatest force in world history, the British Army in 1775, were farmers, were hillbillies, and they were able to push back the greatest force in world history at the time and eventually throw them out of the country. So yeah, it is a deterrent. 350 million guns, 175 to 200 million armed human beings is a very difficult thing to overcome, even with a big army, because eventually you got to send people in there to do their business, and those people are going to meet stiff resistance, and it's no fun.
Mm-hmm. So is your view then that we ought to have the right, like we ought to have weapons to deter dictatorial government, but they should not be military grade?
My view is that you should have weapons in part to deter criminal government. Yes, they're to deter criminals, period, but to deter criminal governments as well. I have look, to me, the compulsion to only sell semi-automatic weapons to citizens it's a non-issue to me. It's just a non-issue. So I wouldn't mind a weapon that could fire on one trigger pull a number of bullets. It's certainly more convenient for us, but that's a politically incorrect position to take in today's day and age. It's also an extremely difficult weapon to shoot, by the way. You have to know what you're doing to be able to use a weapon like that effectively.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of struggling to kind of identify how these policies are going to be set, because on one hand, certain weapons should be left to the military, it sounds like, but on the other hand, we need to be the military in case we go to war with the official military. So how do we decide at this point which types of weapons civilians ought to own? I guess is what I'm struggling with.
Indeed, it's a difficult question, and I'm not sure how to answer it myself. I mean, clearly, weapons of mass destruction, or incendiary bombs, atomic weapons, grenade launchers, and things of that matter, I don't think should be in the possession of citizens. But they certainly should be able to acquire them should the government become dictatorial and go through the streets with tanks, and you have no choice but to fight them with those kinds of weapons. Then eventually you do have to procure them. And perhaps that's what the original militia was for. A check on state power, a civilian check on state power, where weapons of that type were for civilian use, but stored only for specific purposes, right? Mm-hmm. At one time, that's I think sort of the way things went with the American military, and maybe it's okay to have that today. I mean, I think we call the militia the National Guard, but maybe there can be something less formal, but as deeply regulated, as reliable, let's say, who can store weapons for the use of war on behalf of the people against their government, should that come.
Yeah. Now, one thing Yaron Brook has said that I think I do agree with, which is like, if today we overthrow the government, like what's going to be put in its place, right? Like I am not confident in today's anti-government forces. So what are we going to see? The Alex Jones's idea of what a proper government is? No, thanks. So for now, I want to preserve the system we have and change it from within. We got a super chat from Stingy Student with $5 saying, what about tear gas and other accessories? If AR-15s are good for dealing with crowds, tear gas seems like a reasonable choice, unlike frag grenades.
Fragmentation grenades. Those fragmentation grenades are very deadly stuff. I don't know. I haven't thought out this position so deeply as to consider things like that, which are non-lethal weapons that nonetheless give you the capacity to disperse crowds away from you. There may be something to it. We have bear spray, pepper spray, civilian uses, tear gas spray, the civilian uses of that kinds of stuff, and it may not be too far removed from that to say, well, if you had to use some kind of more military grade device to disperse people from your home, that might not be a terrible thing.
Yeah, these are very, very tough questions, and like they kind of like address an almost impossible situation to deal with, which is a civilization in decline, in a sense. Like, it's just reason has been getting farther and farther to the outskirts, and people are increasingly irrational. And at a certain point, it's like, I don't really know how to deal with this. Yeah, like, you should be armed in case a giant mob of people come to kill you. You should be able to protect yourself from that. Yes, I don't disagree with that. It's also, we need to find a way to get to a civilization where that is almost unheard of or completely unheard of, because that's kind of essentially what is going to protect individuals. It's a civilization of rational animals, as Aristotle described us. We got Bonnie, the member, asking, do we have the right to own guns because they're a deterrent to violence, or because we have the right to act freely? I think it's the latter. Like, fundamentally, we have the right to act on our judgment, and that's what our nature requires. And then in order to do that, we sometimes need to deter violence, and that's where the right to retaliatory force, I guess, comes in. So there's like,
I would say you have a right to your life and to take the actions appropriate to defend your life in situations that present themselves to you, and a gun is the most effective tool. It's the most effective means of doing that. It's a great equalizer. So it shouldn't be minimized for the empowerment that it can give people who aren't, who are weak, who are defenseless against some of these people.
God help us all. Well, we hope this has helped some of you think of the issue a bit more clearly, and also maybe a little bit depressed everybody, because some of these questions don't really have an obvious answer a lot of the time. The obvious answer is we need reason. We need a philosophical revolution. We need political liberty. And those are the main things I think that minimize the threat of force between civilians, in my estimation of things. Coming up today at 7 p.m. UK time, it's Keith Weiner talking about the heat death of the economic universe. And then at 10 p.m. UK time, it's Life on Earth with Robert and Amy Nasser on Me, Myself, and Sam Harris. Now, that's an interesting title. All right.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Good talk. And everybody, please leave a like and leave a super thanks on this video on YouTube. And hit that join button to become a member. See you all back tomorrow for the Daily Objective. And goodbye.
Bye-bye.